I hope everybody has had a chance to enjoy their lunch. My name is Kim Hallbauer, and I've been a member of the Council for Post-Secondary Education for a little over 2 years. And for those of you that I've had the opportunity to meet with and talk to, one of the things that people may know about me or have learned over time is that I like to ask questions. So I thought I'd get us started after lunch with a few questions. So how many of you in the room today know there is a statewide attainment goal? All right, good news. How many of you know what that goal is? All right, we have a little work to do. And how many of you feel comfortable explaining that goal to your fellow community members? How will it be achieved? How is your institution contributing? And how can your local business take part? We're going to find out. That's why advocacy is so important and why I am delighted to introduce our luncheon speaker who's going to discuss this issue with us this afternoon. Dr. Carol Cartwright is a senior fellow and senior consultant with the Association of Governing Boards. She's also president emeritus of Kent State University and Bowling Green State University. Prior to her presidency at Kent State, Dr. Cartwright was chancellor for academic affairs at the University of California at Davis and dean for undergraduate programs and vice provost of Pennsylvania State University. You do a lot, Carol. Dr. Cartwright continues to serve higher education today as co-chair of the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics and is a member of the NCAA Committee on Infractions. She is also trustee of Heidelberg University in Tiffin, Ohio, and she has been inducted into the Ohio Women's Hall of Fame. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carol Cartwright.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Can you see me over this podium? I hope you can hear me. I've been told that I have a tall voice, so I'm really delighted to be with you. I had a chance to be with new board members yesterday in an orientation and have had good feedback, so I think you have new members who are ready to go. I want to also thank you for your service to Kentucky higher education. The tradition that we have in our country of citizen volunteers as trustees goes back to colonial times. You know, most other countries have state or federal control of their higher education institutions, but we have entrusted the governance to citizen trustees, and our model has certainly stood the test of time. You're part of a group of about 50,000 people in our country who have stepped up to responsibilities of trusteeship in higher education. So thank you for your service. We need your continued engagement and involvement. Also, kudos to President Thompson for the CPE priority on higher education matters. I have my button on and am delighted to be an advocate for this priority. That priority to build a broad understanding that higher education is the key to personal opportunities and Kentucky's economic growth is so appropriate. It's absolutely right on target. And I hope my remarks this afternoon convince you that as board members, you are well positioned to help him achieve this priority. He told us this morning that he hoped you would be inspired. I was certainly inspired by his comments, and that you would take action. And I'm going to ask you for that call to action as well. He said it's about more than data, and we have plenty of data. He shared some, I'll share some more. But I very much like his notion that this is about being emotionally connected. He said that people need to know our story, and he was referring to the story of higher education. But I would say that people also need to know your story, because as you take a role in advocacy, your personal story of how you have been impacted by higher education could matter. and does matter. So the principle that college confers significant value is very deeply rooted in America's history. Since colonial times, and the governor mentioned it this morning when he talked about Thomas Jefferson, policymakers and educators have held the belief that the benefits to society of college education are significant. Think about the dramatic example of the GI Bill. How many of you have someone, know someone, whose life was changed by the GI Bill? A parent, a grandparent? Let's see a show of hands. That is so impressive. That was a major opportunity in our country to extend access. The government basically said that the research coming out of universities helped us win the war. Now we need to educate more people to win the peace. Recently, and I mean in just the past couple of decades, massive increases in enrollment and college costs have been accompanied by skepticism. Skepticism in some places about the return on investment in college, and also been accompanied by declines in state support as states grapple with competing priorities. And you certainly heard some of that from your governor this morning. Recent reports, some from independent organizations such as Pew and Gallup, suggest that public trust in college and universities has declined. In today's political climate, these reports understandably alarm college and university presidents and board members and other higher education leaders. If we look closely, we find that attitudes about higher education are really quite complex. And here's the good news, some may be more positive than some of the headlines suggest. So let's begin to get a feel for some of this information. Let's look at some data about just one key question. And here it is. I'm wondering if you're ready to venture an answer to the correct answer. How many people think it's 4% or higher? 5% or higher? 6% or higher? Well, let's go the other way. 3% or higher? Got more hands? 2% or higher? Okay, those of you who raised your hands for 2 and 3 are in the ballpark. When these data were collected, it was 2.4%. Obviously, it fluctuates a little bit, but that's a pretty dramatic statistic, isn't it? So the U.S. higher education system, which is composed of institutions that depend on government funding, but still traditionally enjoy considerable independence, rely on public trust so that they can continue to achieve that public funding and yet the autonomy and independence that we value so much. Does the public trust the knowledge that we impart and the research we conduct? Does the public believe that graduates have learned to think independently, or do they believe they're being ideologically indoctrinated? Surveys often focus on the economic benefits, and you saw a lot of that information scrolling as you've been coming into these sessions, and you heard some from President Thompson as well. Those surveys often focus on the economic benefits, and they're important, but they don't as often address this issue of public trust. So it's often challenging to address some of the issues, and we will consider the economic benefits, but we'll also look at the public trust issues. Here are just a few comments that impact us and are related not so much to the economics, but to the public trust. I'm not going to read these to you, but it certainly breaks my heart to see that percentage of Americans who think that higher education is going in the wrong direction. I think we've all seen the data from Moody's as we looked at state budget challenges. And when the students who have just graduated say that their education wasn't worth the price tag, we have to sit up and take notice. Here's a few more headlines. It's important to note that we have strong data to refute these headlines, but again, this issue of public confidence, which is different from the economic value, is more difficult to measure and more difficult to impact. For one thing, media reports might influence survey respondents. Have they just seen a story about the son of immigrants who was first in his family to attend college and has achieved very significant success? Or a young woman, first generation in her family to attend college, who had already developed a business before she graduated? Or did they just see a story about a graduate burdened with student debt, and you know the rest, living in his parents' basement and so on? So higher education is complex. Many institutions and many missions, that's playing out right here in this room. You know that. But here's the thing. The public doesn't know that. The public thinks about higher education as a single entity. They don't break out the differences. So how do we measure whether a college or university transforms lives for the benefit of society? This is essentially what we in higher education are promising, and it's a very difficult measurement task. Thinking about public confidence, we're basically asking about how public confidence sheds a light on whether higher education institutions constitute a shared good worthy of public financial support. A recent Pew survey asked about how institutions have a positive effect on the way things are going in our country. Overall, the highest positive ratings are for, how would you fill in the blank? They're for churches and religious organizations at about 60% of the respondents. But colleges and universities come in second at about 55%. But I will tell you that there are some significant differences between Republicans and Democrats on that measurement. So these surveys show relatively high confidence in higher education compared with other institutions, and that's important to remember. The bottom line message here is that reports about declining confidence in higher education should be evaluated in context. For example, Gallup regularly conducts annual surveys measuring confidence in various organizations, but Gallup did not include higher education in that survey until 2017. So we really can't see a trend about views of higher education compared to other institutions. Many surveys include a general question about measuring overall public confidence. Things like, overall, how good of a job are the colleges and universities doing in your state? But questions that more narrowly focus on whether they trust the knowledge that graduates acquire or the research results produced in our universities are often missing. When we look at the research about reasons that respondents are less confident or dissatisfied, the issues most often cited are it's too expensive, it's too liberal, it's too political, we're not allowing students to think for themselves. So it's worth noting that respondents who have major concerns about the cost of higher education may still have high levels of trust in the ability of colleges and universities to achieve their mission. So we need to look at data about public confidence separately from data about return on investment. Thinking about these different questions and different values may help us understand some of the complexities surrounding public confidence, public criticism, and public understanding. So what's the bottom line here? Be clear about what questions you're asking. All of the data about the benefits, the return on investment, may be missing the mark on issues of public trust and public confidence. That said, let's turn our attention for just a minute to ROI. And here you've already seen some excellent data about Kentucky. But let's just look at some surveys that quickly share that we're overwhelmingly acknowledging the economic value of a college degree. 96% of Americans believe it is somewhat or very important for adults to have a degree or a professional certificate of some kind beyond high school. Still, there is rising skepticism about the fundamental value of higher education, and there are increasing questions, even in the face of these good data, about cost and return on investment. Simply put, the public is less willing to accept at face value the promise that college prepares for productive citizenship and successful employment, and they used to accept that at face value. They do not anymore. So while the cost of attending college may be high, so are the benefits to be reaped by making an investment. In fact, it's very interesting in economic terms to explain some of this concern about cost. We do see increasing demand. And think about what happens in business when you have increasing demand for your product. What can you do? You could raise the price, right? But that's not what we can do in higher education, and it's sort of embedded in the public's mind that with increasing demand will come increasing cost, and they feel they're going to be boxed out. So some of that concern about cost may in fact be coming from this issue of demand. So let's remember, all of you in the public sector, that legislators are attuned to public opinion, as well they should be. So the question is really about, is higher education a public good worthy of public support? Now, we know it's a private good. We know from all of the data that those who get the education benefit in so many ways, and that's been shared with you in multiple ways already today. But the question at the legislators' policymaking government level is higher education a public good worthy of public support? So let's agree that colleges and universities do provide great value society, and let's also agree that the success of our democracy depends on educated citizens. So the private good has in fact a public benefit. And we know that some skeptics are reaching conclusions based on anecdotes. I mentioned earlier living in the parents' basement, a master's degree, and working at Starbucks. So we've seen that these stories impact public opinion, and we've seen that a different story emerges when we consider the facts. President Thompson talked this morning about dispelling those myths, dispelling those facts, and he's absolutely correct. It's something that we need to do. So we have a political problem, but it's also a communications issue and a marketing and branding challenge. And that's why higher education matters as a formal campaign is so important. And I urge you to continue wearing the buttons and get behind this. But it also relates to what Governor Bevins said this morning when he gave the example about Germany. When people are asked to fill out those cards and they're asked to think about the country, and so many of them say Germany, that's because Germany has been very intentional, very deliberate about branding themselves in the way that he described. So, we know you're responding in Kentucky. We heard that from your president this morning. How should we be responding nationally? Because you sit in the larger landscape of higher education. And the Association of Governing Boards has decided to take on this challenge and respond nationally. Although recent surveys indicate that there are many areas where the public is misinformed about higher ed, we should not assume that all public concerns result from ignorance, and we should be fostering dialogue about how to improve. For example, there's a 2015 Gallup and Lumina poll that shows us that 81% of the respondents agreed that higher education institutions must change to better meet the needs of today's students, And an AGB survey in 2017 shows that 92% of board members think that the higher education business models should change. So in the face of these issues of public trust and public confidence and thinking about our advocacy efforts, we also need to acknowledge that we have areas where we must make improvements. And those improvements, when we take them on, will in turn help us build some of that public confidence. And what are those areas? Where could we be most impactful if we take up the challenge of making change and improving? Well, one area that's likely to produce a high impact is increasing access. You heard that from Governor Haslam. You've heard that from your own president. 61% of Americans believe that higher education, education beyond high school, is available to everyone who needs it, yet only 21% believe all can afford it. So we have this issue of access mismatch. So how can we address this link between government funding and access, especially for first-generation, low-income, and other needy students? And how can we highlight our programs to support the students? These are ideas for dialogue that can change public opinion. Efforts that colleges and universities are making to ensure that their graduates have the skills they need to succeed in today's economy. One way to talk about these issues. Nearly 3/4 of employers believe that requiring students to complete a significant applied learning project in college would improve the quality of the graduate's preparation for work. And you see that reflected in your strategic plan about everyone having a work-related experience. There's broad support for career counseling. So we talk about those issues and talk about higher education stepping up to address those issues. We are also creating an environment where we can improve public confidence. This information suggests that the public would welcome more information from trusted sources about efforts to increase access and better prepare students for the world of work. As an interesting aside, thinking about the world of work, I just finished a fascinating book, and I want to draw it to your attention. It's called The Fuzzy and the Techie by Scott Hartley. Has anybody heard of it? He makes the case that we need the liberal arts graduates as much as we need the technical graduates. And in story after story, it's a great read, in story after story, he talks about how some of the major tech companies were founded by liberal arts graduates because they were thinking about problems to be solved, not about a technical issue to be applied. Pinterest, Stitch Fix, Airbnb, YouTube, I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. One of the anecdotes that I found particularly compelling was quite a long story about the development of self-driving cars and about the importance of the psychologists and anthropologists who are working with those teams, because they learned very quickly that they could do all the engineering. That wasn't a problem. But they didn't know enough about human behavior. And when it gets down to driving those cars safely, they had to understand a whole lot more about human behavior in order to build the algorithms. So I think as we think about this new generation, Gen Z, who now coming into our colleges and universities as traditional college students, it's the first ever completely digital generation. They come with these skills. We need to help them think about these broader abilities in critical thinking and problem solving, the creativity that comes with a liberal arts component in an education is extremely, extremely important. So we would argue at AGB, and I know you've already made this argument, President Thompson, here in Kentucky, that now is the time for trustees to get more involved in improving public confidence and public trust. Now, first and foremost, you are fiduciaries, no question about that. But you are also advocates. advocates for your institution, but also advocates for higher education across the nation. You are thought leaders. You can help set the agenda. You travel in influential circles. You have networks that are beneficial in terms of creating this public trust and public confidence. In concert with your universities and colleges, and that phrase is really important because this needs to be coordinated, the messages need to be on point, but in concert with those administrators, you can help us because you're building bridges with the public through your networks. And think about this, they trust you in a way that they don't trust us. When a president or a chancellor comes through the door, they know that that individual is going to be an advocate for higher education, right? That's their business, that's their interest. But they see you as board members as more independent. They don't see you as you do have the interest, but they don't see you that way. So you have a kind of opportunity to make the case that we will continue to make as presidents and chancellors and so forth, but you have an opportunity to impact the dialogue in ways that are beyond what we can do because you're considered to be a trusted source. You can share data about myths and misperceptions. Myths like most students pay the published price, wrong. Myths like the amount students pay exceeds the cost of providing the education, wrong. Myths like the return on investment doesn't justify the cost, wrong. Myths like most students graduate with enormous debt, wrong again. So you can help us dispel the misperceptions and you can share your own positive experiences. AGB has developed a significant array of tools to help you. These are all free and available online. These reports are extremely well researched, very well written, loaded with data, loaded with opportunities that you can use to tell your story. There are a series of brief pieces as well as the more elaborate comprehensive reports that you can have access to and use to help us across the nation in advocating on behalf of higher education and to build the public trust. At AGB, we have goals to increase the number of stories because, as President Thompson said, the emotional connection is important. Your stories in opinion pieces are so helpful in helping us explain the value of higher education. That personal touch becomes very critical. We also want to improve the data regarding the perception of higher education in public opinion polling by helping people understand better the landscape and the context. And finally, we want to increase the collaboration between higher education and policymakers, particularly at the state level. And you're kind of a poster state for doing that. Here are some examples where guardians have stepped up and written op-ed pieces, not just advocating for their institution, but advocating for higher education. Here are some institutions that have adopted the Guardians Initiative as a major priority. You've sort of done it in your own way with Higher Education Matters, but every day more and more institutions are coming on board. So it's catching on. And here's a great story. In Philadelphia, they had so much interest in the advocacy work, and they have so many institutions of higher education and felt the work was so important that they're now branding themselves as a guardian city. Widener University is helping to take the lead, but it's a great partnership between the Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce and the universities led by Widener University. Maybe Kentucky will be the guardian state, the first of the guardian state. You can go to the website and have a look at a great piece of video that talks in more depth from the perspective of university presidents and the president of the chamber about this Guardians Initiative. There are lots of ways to get involved. It's catching on, get engaged, use the tools, follow what's happening, and let us know how we can help. It's been a privilege to affirm what you have been talking about all day through the priorities that the Council on Post-Secondary Education has already established, particularly Higher Education Matters. And I really appreciate this opportunity to bring the work that AGB is doing to your attention. I think it will bolster the work that you're already doing, and you can certainly help us think about how to take this message further and farther, because I think you'll agree that it is an important message. Are you sitting there thinking about the stories that you might be telling, about the opinion pieces that you might be writing, about the informal conversation that you might be having the next time somebody challenges something about higher education that you know to be wrong? I hope you are. I expect you are, given what's happened earlier today. I'd be happy to take a few questions before we move to our panel. Some brave soul. We had one in each session, didn't we? Who got us started? Do you think this can be valuable? I need to see some more heads bobbing out there. All right, okay. I think they want a short opportunity to stand up and stretch before we get to the panel. Thanks again.
Let's give Dr. Cartwright another round of applause.